Hello, my name is Tolg and I exist, therefore I think too much. I will read from Fred's Beyond Good and Evil. So I left off on point 46. Where he talks about morality? Maybe? I don't know. Oh, yeah, it got weird, and I did not understand what he meant by Oriental. Right. Okay, so, point 47, where the religious neurosis has appeared on the earth. So far, okay, we find it connected with three dangerous prescriptions as to regimen: solitude, fasting, and sexual abstinence. Okay, again, Nietzsche was, in his prime during the Victorian period, and he did travel from Germany to England and, generally other places as well, but those were like primary places of travel for him. And if you get into the sexual practices of Victorian England, syphilis was everywhere. Like, I'm not saying abstinence for everyone, but, cleanliness, that's good. You take care of yourselves more than you're fucking around. That's great. Do that, Always get a checkup. But without its being possible to determine with certainty which is cause and which is effect. What do you mean? The cause of religion is solitude, fasting, and sexual abstinence, or vice versa? Or if any relation at all of cause and effect exists there. Oh, I see. Sorry. Religious neurosis is either caused by solitude, fasting, and sexual abstinence, or vice versa. Or not at all. Interesting. I don't think neurosis could be caused by solitude alone, because solitude is, if used correctly, it can be used incorrectly all the time. But if solitude is used correctly, it's just meditative practice. Again, you align your wants with your needs. But fasting, the healthiest version of fasting is intermittent. Is that what it is? Or something along the lines of, like, you go a day, a very short period, without needing to necessarily binge and purge. There's a healthier balance to that. But if you go a day without eating, it does something for the brain. It rewires it based on what the brain understands it needs to depend on. You could go look it up for yourself, because I am not the best at listing things. But yeah, and I guess if fasting were to cause neurosis, it would be more starvation that does that. Starvation, it decreases your capacity, your short-term memory. And I think long-term memory. It just fucks up your memory and spatial awareness and reasoning. So yeah, if it's starvation, then it can cause neurosis. And then sexual abstinence, I think, is vastly different per the genitalia you have. Because as someone, born as a woman, I have no reference for the opposite. But I have been told that it affects thinking. It impairs thinking because of the flow of blood. which is so alien to what I know. I never stop thinking. And it may actually explain in old Grecian, was it Grecian? I think it was Grecian, means by which they judged man, that, a smaller package meant that you were more studious, more capable, a greater man. That might be the reason why. If any of that is real, I'm not sure. Just a few conversations here and there, but so abstinence could cause neurosis based on the genitalia, I think. And if that's the source, then abstaining from a relation with another person, I think, is totally and vastly different from helping yourself. But religion would teach you that that's still a sin, so neurosis would be there. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, yep. Oh, but something recently that I have been understanding is that back in old Roman time, yep, I'm doing good. What was considered a virgin was just an unmarried person. And I want to know when that word started meaning something else. When written, when did it become abstaining versus unmarried? So cause and effect, religious neurosis is what we're talking about, and I lost my place. This latter doubt is justified by the fact that one of the most regular symptoms among savage as well as among civilized peoples is the most sudden and excessive sensuality, which then, with equal suddenness, transforms into penitential paroxysms. Forgive me. World renunciation and will renunciation. Does it? Does it? Only in a society that teaches you ought to feel guilty for that. If you exist in a society that does not have that same sense of guilt that one ought to feel, then they probably won't feel it, as studies, anthropological studies of multiple cultures historically have shown. I think that would be a pattern primarily concerning a culture that teaches guilt, concerning how one conducts themselves in respect to sensuality, I guess. Both symptoms perhaps explainable as disguised epilepsy. What? Okay, that's lost on me. I'm so fucked up on what that means. Okay, but nowhere is it more obligatory to put aside explanations. Around no other type has there grown such a mass of absurdity and superstition. No other type seems to have been more interesting to men and even to philosophers. Perhaps it is time to become just a little indifferent here, to learn caution, or better still, to look away, to go away. What? Yet in the background of the most recent philosophy, that is of Schopenhauer, we find almost as the problem in itself this terrible note of interrogation of the religious crisis and awakening. Okay, I'm not saying I agree with this ideology, but Kafka, I don't know if the name of it is Give It Up. I mean, that's what it says there, but I got a comic book of Kafka because I thought it was cute. Where it describes that if God did not exist, there would still be positions taken up by man as a means of holding order in place. And then you pair that with the understanding that in modern society, which may have been slightly similar to Victorian era. I'm not sure. But the person that speaks the loudest is the person people listen to. However, okay, I'm putting that understanding right side by side with this other understanding, and I'm not sure where this is going. There is also this thing that exists where if you were the only seeing man in a group of blind men, in a world of blind men, and you told people that you could see and you started describing what you could see, more than likely you would be demonized because you're the odd one out and you make everybody realize what they do not have. But if there was a man there that lied about being able to see, they would more than likely follow that man as the leader because he's not saying anything that puts anybody out on the premise that he can't. And the one who can see wouldn't know that, it's upsetting for other people. So I don't know that religion can be blamed for neuroticism or neurosis. But maybe it's just human nature to aim for a means of making sense of reality that doesn't make them emotionally put out. And religion becomes a sort of comfort for that reason. Because it's a controlled, understandable setting. I'm still stuck on him saying disguised epilepsy and then going on to say, just go away. I like him. So Schopenhauer, we find almost as the problem in itself this terrible note of interrogation of the religious crisis and awakening. How is the negation of will possible? Easy. My mom once said in front of the church that we were going to, she was giggling. Oh, don't worry about her becoming a narcissist because, we beat the narcissism out of her. You can lose a sense of will if what you're constantly told is that you could never know better. That what you want and what you will is never going to get anyone anywhere good. Then you learn to try to kill your will so that you don't become the worst part of everybody's life. Negation of will possible. Boop, boop, ba-doop. How is the saint possible? Abuse. Most people, we looked it up recently. There are several ways to become a saint, and it's perform a miracle or an act of God is a major one, and I can't remember the other ones. Essentially, I think the other ones are devote yourself to thank you, brain altruistic acts, I assume, like Mother Teresa. And so the performing in a miracle or an act of God is also in line with cheating death. Can get you promoted to sainthood. So there was this one guy that, I don't know if it was a guy, one person in a village that got hit by a carriage, and then everybody in the village felt really, really bad. And so this person survived for maybe a day or something in the hospital, a short period of time, and then died after that. And they promoted him, the person, after death to sainthood because everybody felt bad. And then they argued about well, he did technically survive dying the first time. A lot of saints are on there because they just didn't die when people presumed they should have. That seems to have been the very question with which Schopenhauer made a start and became a philosopher. Oh, interesting. And thus it was a genuine Schopenhauerian consequence that his most convinced adherent, perhaps also his last as far as Germany is concerned, namely Richard Wagner, should bring his own life work to an end just here, and should finally put that terrible and eternal type upon the stage as Kundry. Type vécu, and as it loved and lived at the very time that the mad doctors in almost all European countries had an opportunity to study the type close at hand, wherever the religious neurosis, or as I call it, the religious mood, made its latest epidemical outbreak and display as the Salvation Army. Most religion, especially Christian religion, promoted, almost like noblesse oblige, promoted volunteer work, especially where medical was concerned, because through provision of medical resources, expansion into other territories could happen. Same with expansion into other classes. Some of these religious institutions had a weird start. Maybe not even religious institutions. The beginning of Planned Parenthood was a means of implementing eugenics. So I don't know that you should define any religion based on a volunteer or a mission work that subscribes to that same religion, because mission work has normally been territorial expansion. And simultaneously, I don't think all volunteer work should be defined as religious neurosis, because sometimes it's just neurosis. Sorry. If it be a question, however, as to what has been so extremely interesting to men of all sorts in all ages, and even to philosophers, and the whole phenomenon of the saint, it is undoubtedly the appearance of the miraculous therein, namely the immediate succession of opposites. You know, I don't know that there were many saints that were noble. If they were, they normally, denounced their noble heritage, or they weren't credited for their nobility primarily, but I mentioned noblesse oblige. It was just expected of the nobility to have more resources, and therein be able and expected to give as a means of giving back to both the economy and the community around them, in support of the government. And given the different factions when nobility did exist, of nobility, whether that was a nobleman that supported the king, or a nobleman that supported the local religion, or a third party to either of those two, like God, I am forgetting all my words, but a middle ground where they choose no side. That noblesse oblige would play into making whatever they support look better. So it was manyfold as to why they would do something, and therein, if a commoner were to do that level of giving to society, there's less expectation of what's behind them. It would be considered more altruistic, because there isn't more past them that they would be performing for. I don't know why I mentioned that, but I guess I just thought it was interesting. Phenomenon of the saint. It is undoubtedly the appearance of the miraculous therein, namely the immediate succession of opposites, of states of the soul regarded as morally antithetical. It was believed here to be self-evident that a quote-unquote bad man was all at once turned into a quote-unquote saint, a good man. How? What? The hitherto existing psychology was wrecked at this point. It is not possible. Is it not possible it may have happened principally because psychology had placed itself under the dominion of morals, because it believed in oppositions of moral values, and saw, read, and interpreted these oppositions into the text and facts of the case? What? He asked what, not me. Quote-unquote miracle, only an error of interpretation? A lack of philology? I would explain miracle as something that defies the laws of physics. I thought that was generally how it was defined. Am I wrong? Okay, so point 48. It seems that the Latin races are far more deeply attached to their Catholicism than we Northerners are to Christianity generally, and that consequently unbelief in Catholic countries means something quite different from what it does among Protestants. In large part due to the different, I want to say morals because it was said too much, the different goals of the governing bodies. A lot of people in Northern Europe lost a love of identity in religion because every single time a monarch changed, normally the religion followed. It would always be replaced with the monarch that came into the position, what they worshipped, and everybody in the country was supposed to worship it too. So if, you went through like the War of Roses, they were seeing a different monarch nearly like yearly. So it'd be year by year that the religion was changing, and it became almost ingrained as something that was nauseating. Not nauseating, but lost its overall effect, I guess. Where I haven't studied enough of Latin countries, but my belief is that Catholicism was the main staple generally. And, as much as I have ever understood it, and I'm not denying any individual their practice in religion or religious belief, but religion has always been a militaristic tool designed to aid in governing a large populace. If you set a standard of rules based on morals and ethics, then it is far easier to essentially have less policing. Less resources are drained from the governing body trying to keep everybody in their individual, reality in line with what the governing body has a goal of. So, means something quite different than what it does among Protestants, namely a sort of revolt against the spirit of the race. Race being Latin, while with us it is rather a return to the spirit or non-spirit of the race. We Northerners undoubtedly derive our origin from barbarous races, even as regards our talents for religion. True. We have poor talents for it. One may make an exception in the case of the Celts, who have theretofore furnished also the best soil for Christian infection in the north. Didn't Christianity do what Rome essentially did every time they took over a country? They just enveloped that mythology into their own. Like God took on traits of Zeus. The Christian ideal blossomed forth in France as much as ever the pale sun of the north would allow it. How strangely pious for our taste are still these later French skeptics, whenever there is any Celtic blood in their origin. That's interesting that it traveled that far. How Catholic, how un-German does Auguste Comte's sociology seem to us? With the Roman logic of its instincts, how Jesuitical? That amiable and shrewd cicerone of Port Royal, Saint Beuve, in spite of all his hostility to Jesuits, and even Ernest Renan. How inaccessible to us northerners does the language of such a Renan appear, in whom every instant the merest touch of religious thrill throws his refined, voluptuous, and comfortably couching soul off its balance. Let us repeat after him these fine sentences, and what wickedness and haughtiness is immediately aroused by way of answer in our probably less beautiful but harder souls, that is to say, in our more German souls. Okie dokie. Okay, then he has literally a paragraph of French. I will translate that in editing. I am sorry. Advancements in technology has bridged the gap of classes where now I can just use a Google Translator instead of having to learn a whole ass other language. Okay, so after the French, he says, these sentences are so extremely antipodal to my ears and habits of thought that in my first impulse of rage on finding them, not good words apparently, I wrote on the margin, more French. Until in my later rage, I even took a fancy to them, these sentences with their truth absolutely inverted. It is so nice and such a distinction to have one's own antipodes. I'm lost. I guess I'll read 49 because I feel like leaving you with that is unfair. That which is so astonishing in the religious life of the ancient Greeks is the irrestrainable stream of gratitude which it pours forth. It is a very superior kind of man who takes such an attitude towards nature and life. Later on, when the populace got the upper hand in Greece, fear became rampant, also in religion, and Christianity was preparing itself. I like that. I don't agree with everything that happened in, Greece, but I like their food. And I like a lot of their teachings. I think they produced as a people's a good amount worth learning from. So, the more I read of him, the more I like him. I always felt internally like an old man that did not agree with much and would yell at kids for playing on my lawn. So I feel at home with Fred. Okay, have a good night. Enjoy yourselves. Probably do something good. I don't know. Bye.